Wow, that's a kind welcome. Well, I wish you a lovely good morning and a very warm welcome to this overwhelming castle of Leopoldskron, and a particularly warm welcome to this debate, the debate about things actually are about. When we talk about markets, are they here for people, markets for people, or the other way around? So, well, are markets here to serve us, people, and our needs, or are we to adapt to the needs and requirements of the market? I'm hearing a little echo, so no, it works. Okay, well, the way the question is asked, well, there's a very clear answer, at least from a moral point of view. Well, naturally, the markets are to be here for the people, but many actually have the impression that in reality the situation is absolutely the other way around, that the people and their lives are considered variable. So, well, they can be moved at libitum, at the exo-files of the markets. And if the claim, and at least the objectively perceived reality, diverge so much, then this promises at least an interesting and exciting discussion. My name is ORF Brussels, and I'm a free European journalist, and I live, and this will not come as a surprise, in Brussels, but actually I'm from the Netherlands, the country which developed the first speculative bubble in the 17th century. Many of you will not have heard about it. It's not about a vital product, but it was about tulips. At the time, it was about tulips. Well, no, I just have to check my document, well, my pad. First of all, I would like to thank Martin Weiss and the Salzburg Global Seminar. The Salzburg Global Seminar, since 1947, has committed itself, since it met for the first time here at Leopoldskron Castle, when young thinkers from Europe and America came together, and they have committed themselves to, well, face young leaders with their task ahead. Well, what is their task ahead, actually? It is to shape a better world. Well, this is quite a claim, a high claim to this interesting debate. And let me just share with you some organizational matters, some housekeeping matters. Well, naturally, we would be incredibly grateful if you could mute your telephones. You do not have to switch them off, because if you wish to post something, please use hashtag Markets for People. This is written in one word, Markets for People. And if you wish to use Slido a bit later on, you may ask questions via the Slido app at the end of the debate. And the password is, well, Markets for People. So much about my brief introduction. And now we are looking forward to some introductory words by Mrs. Martina Jöbstl, member of the Salzburg Province Parliament, and she's also active in the Committee for European Affairs. A warm applause to Martina Jöbstl. And a warm welcome to the stage. The floor is yours. Well, ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers online, representing Dr. Wilfried Hasler, the province governor, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you, particularly in a region that borders other countries, as is Salzburg. We on a daily basis notice how important open borders, open markets, and open trades are. But in order to make sure that markets work, we require competition. And in order to make sure that there is fair competition and fair markets, we also require competition authorities and competition policies. And to make sure that the results and actually the outcome of their efforts can be perceived by people, we also require a dialogue about markets and competition. And so it's a great pleasure for me that the European Commission is organizing an event such as this one. You are reading reaching out to people. You discuss markets with people, and that's so great. You discuss the benefits markets harbor for us, for people. And thank you so much for not discussing here in Brussels or in Vienna, but thank you for organizing this event here in beautiful Salzburg, engage in joint exchange, and we hope that we stay in dialogue on an ongoing basis. I look forward to this exciting event. Thank you. Mrs. Jöbstl, thank you very much for this brief introduction, and a particularly warm welcome to the head of in the DG competition, Alexander Winterstein, who will be the moderator of today's debate. Hello, a very warm welcome to the stage. Thank you. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Mr. Winterstein. A warm welcome. Good morning. My name is Alexander Winterstein. I work with the European Commission in the DG competition, and our task there is to shape competition politics, but also to implement the European competition rules at European level. And when we talk about competition, then we do it most of all, firstly, in Brussels, and secondly, we talk with experts, specialists, entrepreneurs, lawyers, advisors, consultants, and so on. So we always stay within this group of specialists in Brussels. But actually, in reality, competition is something that is important to each and every one of us. We all participate in the markets, being as consumers or indirectly as citizens. And for this reason, this is a topic that concerns us all. And our task as the guardians of competition is to ensure that these markets remain fair, that each and everybody has an opportunity on these markets, so that the markets work for the people. And this is our claim. And the question is this actually true? And this is why you see the question mark here behind me. The people there for the markets or the other way around? And we can have all sorts of different views on that. And this is particularly the topic of today's discussion. And, well, the member of the province parliament has already mentioned that we want to leave Brussels, to reach out to people. And so we decided to go to the regions to meet the people. We had one meeting in North Italy, and we will have such other meetings in other EU member states, and today we're meeting in Salzburg, and looking around, I'm sure this was the perfect choice. I hope that you will enjoy this discussion, and we put together a Salzburg panel. So intentionally, no panelists from Brussels, but from the province of Salzburg. And before actually discussing with people from Salzburg, both on the panel and in the audience, I would like to hand over to Professor Felbermayr. I don't think that I have to introduce him. He's one of the best-known economists in Austria. Unfortunately, he couldn't come to Salzburg, although he would have loved to come. But there's a direct connection to Vienna, and he will speak to us. And I hope that we can see Professor Felbermayr now on the screen. I look forward to his speech. Well, I wish you a lovely good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me and even see me. Actually, I would have loved to be with you in beautiful Salzburg. Dear Mrs. Jöbstl, it is a pity that it didn't work. I would like to congratulate Mr. Wittgenstein, representing the organizing. It's so important to move this debate to the country, to Austria, Salzburg, and particularly the topic of competition. Thinking about markets is a key topic for prosperity, and so we need to discuss this much more often in public. This is a very important issue, and the question whether markets are there for people or vice versa, well, this is a question we must answer in a certain manner. Well, definitely markets are there for people. This is very clear, because if this wasn't the case, then it would be absolutely necessary necessary to introduce some introductory measures. There are 7 items on my agenda. The first one is directly related to the questions, are markets there for people or not? Because there's something I would like to add. Markets are being shaped by people. They are being designed by people. The framework conditions are being defined by the state with all its different institutions and everything that goes with it in order to make sure that the markets can function. And naturally, the players, the actors in the markets are people, because it is people that shape the markets. Economists often speak about market design. I mean, markets are not God-given. They are no natural events, but they are something that, well, is being developed from the social and the cultural context, and we need to shape them. And there's a second topic on my agenda is, well, we've had some very festive events, the 30th anniversary of Adam Smith, a very well-known economist. There are lots of discussions now about him. So he actually, he really coined modern national economy, and he highlighted that the driver of prosperity is sharing of labor. So that, for instance, the baker bakes bread, the shoemaker makes shoes, and that they exchange via markets. So there is no bartering, no exchange, shoes against bread, but that they use money, their sharing of labor, and use money to pay for the services. And in order to make sure that it works and that there can be the prosperity effect, this requires markets. And this is a key requirement for the development of sharing of labor. And sharing of labor is key to productivity, which leads to prosperity, because without one, there wouldn't be the other. Otherwise, there would be individual autarky, and you cannot imagine what this would mean. I mean, looking back into the medieval village systems, or even back to the tribal communities, at the time we were closer to this situation where sharing of labor only took place in a very local, very narrow, restricted space. So this function of markets, the role markets play for prosperity and wealth, is central. And in order to make sure that they work, and Mrs. Jöbstl highlighted that, we require competition, because without competitions, markets will find it difficult and cannot perform as they should. Economic theory says, well, in a competitively organized market, the best possible result can be achieved, and the outcome is the sum total of the profits we can generate and of the benefits. This is assessed in monetary units. This means that we have to make sure that the sum is maximal, but this doesn't mean that this money, this sum total, is fairly distributed. But let me say a word of caution. Yes, distribution issues are very, very important, but when it is about creating competition and safeguarding or even promoting competition, then it is not first of all issues of distribution that are key, but what this is important is to make sure that markets can work in order to make sure that we have the best possible overall result. And based on that, some distribution policy measures can be added, because if you start too early with the distribution argumentation, then you run the risk of making it happen that markets cannot work and cannot work properly. And the third item I would like to highlight, it is crystal clear that markets cannot work without any, well, requirements in order to make sure that they work positively. And these requirements to make sure that markets can work have to be created and maintained. A key requirement is ownership rights, and that these rights can be implemented in courts. But courts are governmental state units. Law needs to be implemented. Without courts and protection of ownership rights, property rights, it will not be possible to generate positive results in the market. And this is a historic achievement, that we have this legal system. Without legal system, no markets. Without legal system, we would always have the right of the might. But to make sure that markets work, we also have to make sure there is freedom of contract. So if somebody is forced to implement a transaction they do not want, then, well, the forces of the market wouldn't work. So freedom to conclude the contracts you wish is important. So power structures, asymmetrical structures in business constellations between workers and or employers, or between buyers and sellers, asymmetrical situations are problematic. We call this situation power. One aspect of the market, one part of the market has power, the other does not. And if the system is asymmetrical, then the principles from the national economy will not work. Then markets are not something that would serve people's welfare, or cannot well develop its full potential to the benefit of people. And in order to make sure that it works, the competition needs to be protected, and the requirements to make sure that markets work have to be created in a new manner on an ongoing basis, and this needs to be safeguarded. And this brings us to competition law and protection of competition. So what does this mean? If there is power in the market, once such a power has been developed, then it must not be misused. And if it is being misused, then this must be sanctioned. But there is one step earlier. This means that power or the should not be too big in the market, so this should not be developed. So, and well, if there are no overwhelming power structures in the market, then this is the requirement for ensuring that there is no misuse. Because if this does not work, then market economic processes can be harmful. If you cannot create certain markets based on the law, for instance, then market processes that decide how much is being produced, who consumes, and how much is being consumed can be harmful. For instance, because property rights are being destroyed, and you have to create these property rights, and you have to make sure that there is fair competition in the market. And fair competition means that there mustn't be any asymmetrical situation, that nobody must have a power position forcing the others to engage into a position they have not chosen freely. So the economic benefits can only be created if markets live up to certain requirements. But this is not only about economy, it goes far beyond that. It's about democracy and social policy, and that power and market is not such a good thing, because if there is too much, there's massive concentration of property. Darren Nobel, I'm sure that one of the years he will win the Nobel Prize, because he thinks about the fundamental basis of prosperity. So the perspective is always from democracy and social policy in order to avoid an asymmetrical power situation in the markets. And the next item is the debate that is currently going on in Europe and in Austria. So it dominates political action. This is inflation, for instance, killer inflation. This is how many call it. I don't think this is a very fortunate word. So it's not so. It's much too normative, actually. But one thing should be clear, that competition policy should not be directed towards the topic of inflation. So, I mean, fighting inflation is very important, can be a task of politics, but it's monetary policy. It's in Frankfurt, the ECB and the Minister of Finance has to ensure that. But competition law, competition policy does not focus on the changes of prices, but on the level of prices. If competition policy works, then the price level is low, and low price level means purchasing power for the people, that you can buy more with the euro you earn, or can buy better products, top quality products at a lower price. So it's more about the level, but not about the changes. And for this reason, discussion about competition and inflation will interact, so that competition could reduce inflation. This is not such a good definition, but it's clear that competitive markets mean that if costs changes, these costs are not immediately passed on to consumers. So fair sharing is necessary between consumers and producers. If the market situation enables it, then consumers should be in a better position. So against the background of the high inflation, it is correct and justified to ask whether competition policy is good enough, fit for purpose, and unilateral results on the markets needs to be prevented. And the second topic that is very important at political level is when we look to China. This is my fifth item. It's about distortions in the geo-economic landscape. Then we often hear the argument that we need to redesign competition policy. We need to have a higher market concentration, more monopoly-like structures in the national market, because in the global market there are two large blocks. There's no European monopole. There is a duopoly. So just thinking about the Ariston merger or not. So when it's about this question of creating a fair trade, a good competitive topic, then we need to use trade policy tools. And there are such tools, but maybe they are not used intensively enough. Anti-dumping rules, for instance, or anti-state aid rules, because competition policy is not the first instance to address that, because that's a topic of trade politics, and we always have to be very careful that on the geopolitical altar, the benefits of consumers at home are being sacrificed. So, I mean, we need to be better equipped in Europe. But it might happen that, for instance, if they were sacrificed on the altar in Europe, then the burden would be actually on the consumers. And so we require some good trade instruments so that we do not see any negative impact on local consumers. And the next topic is a hot topic. This is green transformation. And it is often being said that in order to make sure that the green transformation can work, competition rules needs to be suspended or mitigated in Europe. And there is often talk about the fact that in order to have an opportunity, we have to, being better to defend ourselves against China, more concentrations, higher concentrations, in order to be more competitive at the international level, a new technology, race for green growth. But the same holds true, as I said before, when I discussed the topic of geoeconomy, China. There are better tools to be used, and we always have to be careful not to overdo things. And the third the final item is a word of warning that the European state aid law that is closely connected to competition legislation, that this law that has evolved over decades and is a pillar for the functioning of the European internal market must not be put up to this position much too early. That worries me. In the year 2022, we have seen a massive increase in approvals for nationally paid out subsidies granted at European level. Based on the current figures, this is 672 million euros, and this is almost twice as much as the Austrian GDP. Huge sums of monies that have been allowed to be paid as a state aid. In the years before the COVID crisis, state aid was about 100 million. It's about 7 times as high right now. This is a quantum leap. 4.2% of the GDP has been approved, but all this money has and will be paid out. So there is a major shift here, and this really worries me a lot. But why? Because this state aid all too often goes most directly to the groups, to the companies, and do not have a price-reducing effect. But this is something companies just take along, this state aid money. And if we overdo this state aid, we might harm the internal market. The majority of the 672 billion were being submitted by Germany and approved, and half of the rest of the amount mainly by France, and many other EU member states cannot afford to make such state aid contributions. So Again, a word of warning to the large member states not to overdo things. I can tell you I would love to be with you. It's a very important debate you are having here in Salzburg, and I apologize for not being able to come to Salzburg, but I'm sure that you will have a good and most fruitful discussion. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Felbermayr. Well, that is very extensive and most useful because this creates the framework for today's discussion. He has touched on each and every topic that plays a role, but this brings us to the core. I promised a Salzburg panel, and I start with Raffaela Schaidreiter, who just 300 meters from here, she started her career at the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation studio in Salzburg, and for many years she has headed the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation's office in Brussels. So she's the most appropriate person to discuss this topic from the Brussels point of view. Raffaela. And Salzburg, and well, this brings us to our host, Martin Weiss. I tried to find him here in the audience. Oh, there he is, there. Well, also 300 meters from here, he started his career at the academic secondary modern high school. But since then, well, his professional career has led him to the USA, to Israel, to Cyprus as Austrian ambassador. And it's a great pleasure to being hosted by him today. It's great to be here. Thank you, dear Martin Weiss. Would you please come to the stage? Thank you. And Salzburg number 3, Sepp Schellhorn. So I do not have that I have to introduce Sepp Schellhorn, since we have also viewers from outside of Salzburg. He's an entrepreneur, he has a hotel and gastronomist, he is a politician. This is no fault of his character, but between 2014 and 2021 he was a member of the Austrian National Council for the NEOS party, spokesperson for tourism, and many of you will know him better as Sepp. So Sepp, what are you doing? This is a cooking series. He presents on TV, but this is not the topic of today's event. But it's great to have Sepp Schellhorn here in our midst. A warm welcome to you. Yes, here, please, this chair. Thank you. And then we have somebody who is half Salzburg, Natalie Harsdorf-Borsch. She is the acting head of the competition authority in Vienna. So she and her colleagues make sure that the competition works for you, dear audience, that the markets work for you. What we do in Brussels with the DG, Natalie Harsdorf-Borsch, and her colleagues do for you in Austria. And the discussion about markets and power and competition would be unthinkable without her. Dear Natalie, would you please come over? And before we start, Verena Altenberger would have loved to be here, but as is often the case with movie stars, often it takes longer to shoot the film, and she is there because she's currently making a film. It would have been great to have her, so we look forward to her next movie. But maybe she can watch the live stream of our debate. So let's start immediately. Raffaela, Mrs. Schaidreiter. So we switch to the professional panel discussion wording. Mrs. Schaidreiter. Professor Felbermayr has just told us about the theoretical aspect. And my question to you as a journalist, but also to somebody who, well, is a political monitor of the situation. So how do these topics arrive with people? Has everybody understood? And if yes, or if no, why haven't people actually understood? And what is the approach based on your long-standing experience? I believe Professor Felbermayr is among those economists who can actually make very clear points and explain things very clearly, but these headings, market and competition, are very abstract. Just to tell you a brief story, I told my mom that I will be on the panel here in Salzburg, and she said, what will it be about? I said, about markets and competition. She said, well, what is it all about? What does that mean? And I believe many of you will also have felt that when you read the headline, markets, people, competition. So by and large, what should that be? Or what could that be? And my task as a journalist and as a reporter from Brussels, my task is to at least undertake an effort to translate that into something understandable, because a lot that has to do with markets and competition takes place in Brussels. When we talk about the single market, well, what is a single market? The interior market. So this is the European Union, the 27 countries, and there are markets, and all these markets form one large market with 500 million consumers. And if I'm an entrepreneur in Austria, then I have certain rules of the game I need to observe. I'm a competitor in Poland or Italy. Well, they actually have to observe the same rules. So I, as a consumer, if I buy an Austrian or Italian product, I need to be sure that it meets the same standards. The product has been developed based on the same standards, that the same emission levels have been observed, and so on. And precisely this is what the internal market is supposed to be. But the words single market, interior market, internal market, or EU market is so much in the headlines because we are facing a transformation that has to take place at a very rapid pace, a pace not seen before. The economy has to be greener, more digital. This requires a lot of input by those who shape this market. On the one hand, this is the European Commission that suggests rules to say, well, we assume that batteries need to be recycled in this or that way, that you have to meet these CO2 emission laws, or from 2050 on go without any tailpipe emissions. And then there are national markets that have their special features. As a vehicle supplier in Austria, they have special requests. Italy might say, we do not want to change our luxury vehicles to e-motor vehicles. Or Poland and the Czech Republic, they also have some huge automotive industry. They also might have some different plans for their future. So the market, what does this mean for our everyday life? This is something very close to us, actually, something very tangible, but it looks so abstract because everybody says the market will shape things, regulate things. And as you have just heard, it's a tricky thing because it takes so long for me to explain that. And then on top of that, there is competition that launches an impetus under which condition things can produce. France didn't have so many problems to give generous state aid to companies. Often Germany has another point of view as regards state aid. Well, these are these powers of friction within the European Union, but competition that has an impact on each and every one of us. I hope that you heard the radio morning journal, and you might have heard Mrs. Harsdorf-Borsch from the Austrian Federal Competition Authorities, because there are price comparison portals, and the Austrian Competition Authority cooperates with them because they look at the prices in supermarkets, how much they cost, how prices are well labeled, represented. You mustn't forget the energy prices over the last few months. There have always been considerations. Is everything going fair? Are there some agreements between market players? So market and competition are two headlines, two keywords that have a very extreme effect on our everyday life, something we cannot understand the full order of magnitude. And I believe that each citizen needs to be interested, has to be interested in what the market is, what how the market works for me as an individual. So what does competition have to do? And there's interplay of national and European level. Super, thanks a lot. And now I'd be interested how an entrepreneur sees the situation. But he's not only entrepreneur, but he's also been active in politics. He is very well aware of the political framework conditions that forms a basis for competition. So how did you address that topic as politician? How are you addressing it as an entrepreneur? Well, wish you a lovely good morning. So I would like to start with my entrepreneur, and now I have a sound outage. The sound doesn't work. The interpreter apologizes. There's no sound. Apologies, I need to...
Tourismusweltmeister, 150 Millionen Nächtigungen hat es vor Corona gegeben. Wir haben 40.000 Gästebetten zu viel. Als Unternehmer müsste ich sagen, am liebsten wären mir die 40.000
Okay, back to Schellhorn. It would be great to have 40,000 beds in hospitals, and we get a premium, and to close that down, that I would get higher profits, the more money. But from a customer's point of view, it would be good to have a competition, because all clients benefit from the fact that prices in tourism are so low. This has to do with the fact that there is excess offer. You might say it's too good, excess supply. So this is good, and it's good that there is competition about tourism industry among owners of hotels, because this makes sure that the prices stay low. In South Tyrol, due to the zoning regulation, there has always been a limited number of hotel beds, in South Tyrol. But South Tyrol is not so much different than Austria in terms of the weather. Maybe the weather is better in South Tyrol, but the prices are higher by 25% because they restricted the market. They limited the number of hotel beds, but this not only mean that the prices went up, but the quality went up too. But I'm an enthusiast for competition. I said these 40,000 hotel beds, well, this is too much. These are companies that are about to die, but unfortunately they cannot close. Maybe they will be handing over the hotel to the generation. And another important example is social democracy. All of a sudden there were 3 candidates. Was a free market, free competition, and all of a sudden the number of members increased, and before there was just one candidate which was determined by the party. And markets always work and will always work to growth and prosperity. What is important for a free market, and this needs to be guaranteed, and this is transparency and democracy. Everything else wouldn't work, and this brings me to the political aspects. And this brings me to Mrs. Schaidreiter, to the media. So what has surprised me so much, Mrs. Schaidreiter talked about the internal market, the single market, and what made me so angry when I was in Parliament was this discussion driven by the yellow press about the free trade agreement TTIP or Mercosur, because standards are being defined, and nevertheless the free market and competition are being promoted, and only competition and free markets will bring innovation. Only if there is a highly contested market, I, as an entrepreneur, am willing to act faster, more innovative, and try to be better than the others if there is no pluralism in the market. And just to come back to this radio transmission in the morning, I have been surprised about the study produced by university went about prices in trade, and when it comes to a dominant role in the market, this is what we all feel. This is our dependency on Russian gas. We cannot get rid of this dependency, and this is in a certain manner also a driver of inflation. And I do not agree with Mr. Felbermayr. He talked about some greedy inflation because he is the one who boosted that. inflation based on companies' greed. So, Mr. Harsdorf, you have an entrepreneur next to you who loves competition, and he's ready to face up competition and address the topic positively. But we feel that this is a topic not each and every entrepreneur sees the way he does, because otherwise the competition authority would have lost its job. So what can you report about your work, the impact of competition, tangible impact on the audience and the viewers? So we have never been as close to the markets, to the problems as now. So we saw COVID-19, then the war in Ukraine, this feeling of insecurity, and this correlated with the number of cases when we were contacted. It's good that there is this trust, that this confidence, and so lots of people turn to the Austrian Competition Authority. If you have been to our offices, then you know that we are not based in a very lovely building in Vienna. It was called the ugliest building in Vienna, by the way. But from a digital point of view, you can reach us very well online. And we undertake an all-out effort to give feedback within 48 hours. And Raffaela Schaidreiter says, well, competition, this is not a tangible thing. Nobody knows what it is. But I can tell you, my impression is that lots of people really have an idea what the Federal Competition Authority does, although this perception often changes. But we can often explain things to topic or send it to the competent authority in Brussels or in Germany. So our impression is that the Austrian consumer and also the Austrian companies, when they perceive or are aware of the fact that there is the Federal Competition Authority, they see us as a contact, the first point of contact for lots of topics that worries them. And this is what I tell my excellently trained team, excellent economists, engineers, lawyers. But what I tell them, we have to make things tangible for people. We need to explain what we do to people so that everybody understands what we do, otherwise it wouldn't work. And if an SME has a question, then they do not require a doctoral thesis on how to solve the issue, but we have to come up with some practical topics they need to look at. For this reason, we develop so many guidances. We have just developed a compliance guideline with the Austrian Chamber of Economics, and that's not always the case in the public sectors. And colleagues from the law enforcement sector asked me, so why are you so active when it comes to publications and so on? That's not your task. And said, no, it is our task. We have to be transparent. What I love is there was no infringement of all, no violation of rules. You know, the best thing is if people do not breach any rules because they know what the authority wants. And then you have to look back and think, where does competition law come from? And this is nothing new. The ancient Romans and Greeks, they had known competition. There was this ban on forming monopolies. There was this ban on agreeing on pricing. There were very draconian fines. We would definitely not all well praise, because if you brought the law at the time, you were banned, and then everything calmed down. And what is the of modern competition law and the very strong national economies? USA 1890, modern competition law. The USA has the most strict antitrust law of the world, because they say we keep the markets free. This is an important building block for making sure that companies can succeed. Germany 1958 at least, and we were set up in 20 22. I mean, okay, we're not about the leader group. We actually had to catch up. Our former Director-General is here. Dr. Danner is also from Salzburg, and he enabled us to catch up with all the other countries, and we are really, really fighting hard to catch up with the other countries. And we had started from scratch. There was no antitrust registered. Lots of mergers were not tested, and companies that held a critical view on what was going on at the time did not have a critical say. So this was the beginning, but now we have caught up on that. So what does this mean on everyday life? What does this mean for the consumer, for companies, and everyday life? This brings us back to the question, does everybody love competition? Answer is yes, they all love competition, but if it affects themselves, then it might not be so convenient. And I'm sure we all know that. For instance, if we compete in sportive events, or we know it from school, competition is not always something very nice and comfortable, but it's a driver. It enables us to become better and stronger, and this is also reflected in our procedures. Just to give you an example, if there is a merger, if two companies merge and want to merge, and this leads to a certain size and can have an impact on the market, this needs to be registered with us. And the companies who want to merge want that, but if other companies do not like that, then they will get in touch with us and say, we have no access to a certain product we require and will no longer be able to get this product because the company that supplies this product was bought by the company that bought this product and then sells us, and we will not be able to buy the product any longer. So it's very difficult to strike a lovely balance. Professor Felbermayr talked about the freedom of property rights, the freedom to conclude the contracts you want to conclude, but you always have to be careful if markets tip or if other companies have problems from developments in the market. In the foodstuff retail sector, there was the AG Metro merger, and the antitrust court said that 2 other locations have to go to some other retail dealer because it's important for the gastronomy and for the people to have some other supplier in the region. And this is a typical result. So how can we strike a balance to make sure that hotels and owners of restaurants have some acceptable prices? With this Metro and the merger. When it comes to antitrust law, this brings me to Adam Smith, and he's also said something and said if companies meet in a room, if competitors meet in a room, and the outcome will be some agreement reached between these individual players. I mean, the majority of companies in Austria, they want to define what they do, they are compliant, and they compete with each other. But every now it might happen that there is the formation of trusts. So what impact will that have? There are economic studies, up to 20% price markup, and the Austrian authority, for instance, broke up the school bag trust in Austria and moved things. Just imagine, everybody who has children knows that children need school bags. They're incredibly expensive. They cost 150 euros, and because of this trust, they cost 180 euros. The consumer doesn't know what's going on in the background, but he feels the impact on his purse. And highly problematic is the topic when it's about public tenders, procurement, when it's about taxpayers' money. 12% of the OECD GDP goes into public tender procedures. But when price markups are so high, what will that mean for taxpayers? They have to pay more. So these are actual tangible impacts, and we need to take action against such developments. Professor Felbermayr mentioned the power in the market, and this is an area where we get exclusively complaints from entrepreneurs against some very large internationally active group saying that they abuse the market position. An example is this investigation investigation we instigated against Amazon. Lots of Austrian dealers complained with my authority, and they said they do not only feel discriminated against because of the contractual agreements of Amazon, they do not even come in a situation to meet Amazon representatives because the Austrian companies are so small, so they have to accept the rules forced upon them by Amazon. They have no room for maneuver. And so it's important that these small companies can turn to the competition authority and say, Amazon, we are now opening an investigation procedure against your terms and conditions. And at the end, Amazon changed its terms and conditions for the dealers worldwide. So this is some concrete result, a positive impact on the market, and to make sure that markets are there for the people and for the companies and not vice versa. Thank you. You mentioned the United States. And this is an inspiration, actually, and very important. And I would like to ask Mr. Weiss, former ambassador of Austria to the US, not only to share his Austrian perception, point of view, but also based on his long-standing experience in the US market, his competition. Are they there for the people or the other way around? Can we learn from the Americans? Is this interesting for us? What's the difference compared to Austria? I believe this would be highly interesting. Yes, I'm pleased to do so. Well, you've mentioned lots of keywords, but there's just one thing I would to mention, because in the morning you said Salzburg Global Seminar was established, well, to improve the world, and well, it sounds highly high-fledged, but at the time these were 3 young students from Harvard who said in 1947, after the end of the Second World War, if we continue along these lines and just, well, rebuild Europe, building highways and airports, then we will slip into the Third World War. This shouldn't work, cannot work. We have to reach out and engage in dialogue with people. And the University of Harvard said, this is something we're not interested in. What do you want? And the 3 young students said, we want to implement it. They bought this castle by Helene Thimmig. Max Reinhardt, her husband, died in New York, and this castle was restituted to her. And the 3 people succeeded in building up this castle, and now, 70 years later, we are here because 3 young people had a goal and they wanted to achieve something. You mustn't forget you can change the world, and you do not have to delegate it upwards. It can work in very concrete terms. And about the US, yes, I've spent lots of years throughout my professional life in the US. What was interesting, this contribution on the strict antitrust law in the US, you mentioned 1890s, clearly before we introduced it. It's interesting because in the US we know this tradition which is very much against the state. Ronald Reagan once said, in famous quotation, what are the most terrible words in US? I am from the government and I'm here to help. So terrible words in English. Roman Norquist, it is an anti-tax activist, and he said, I do not want to ban government, but I want to shrink government so much that I can drown it in a bathtub. I mean, this is quite a tough statement. And the US is a state that was born because of this resistance against the state. But when it comes to competition, they are fighting very tough. And here, competitive law leads to administrative fines. And in the US, you will very soon have some criminal proceedings instigated against you. So this contrast is quite interesting, actually. And for us in Austria, in Europe, we can actually be proud of lots of things we have achieved in Europe. There was a Belgian prime minister who said in Europe there are 2 types of states, small countries and small countries which do not know that they are small countries. Because in reality, every EU member state is a small state. And the whole game will only work if we work together. And we have achieved a lot looking at the internal market, the single market, looking at the currency. And this means that I have the opportunity to compare. I used to have Deutsche Mark, a shilling, a lira, and well, the value was reduced. I didn't know how much does this product cost in lira and so on. But then now we have the euro roaming fees in Europe. Just try to think that could ever happen in the US, how much they pay for roaming, and broadband coverage is so bad in the US. So we do not have to hide our lights. We have achieved a lot, and this possibility to compare something we have in 1994. I worked for the Austrian Association of Industrialists. The highlight was the birth of my son on the 12th of June when we voted for EU member, becoming an EU member, and my son was born. This was one of the most beautiful days ever in my life. And he said that Austria is a small market, and the companies, they only want to settle in a very comfortable manner and a relaxed manner in Austria. And all of a sudden we have the EU, more transparency, stricter authority, more insights. Well, this might be inconvenient and uncomfortable for some entrepreneurs, but clients and consumers will benefit a lot. And this is why it happened. And so this is why I'm so mad about discussions triggered by a few politicians who are dreaming about an exit. And I asked him, didn't you pay attention at school? Yeah, just, there was this campaign we on the part of the economy launched, and the economy, they were very sensible at the time. And we explained, the Chamber of Economics explained to entrepreneurs why EU membership is so good. And when I hear some politicians mention exit, I ask them, have you looked at what's going on in the UK with their Brexit? The market is much larger. They could, well, actually afford such a thing, and you see how disastrous it works in the UK. So stop talking about an exit. And the internal market is of benefit to us, and people actually realize that. And there's one thing we need to start, and Professor Felbermayr started with that, because in the US is the story, well, the market will regulate it. Yeah, but the market doesn't come as something heaven sent. We created the conditions for the market, and we can change the conditions as well, and what is particularly important. And there's the huge gap between the US and Europe. What about distribution? But this is a topic when we talk about taxation and tax law, and not so much about the market. But we shouldn't forget taxation. Thank you. I would suggest that our panelists now, if they wish to, they could also comment on the statements by the other colleagues on the panel. And while they think about their questions, then you, dear audience, could think about possible questions you could ask in a few minutes. And this also holds true for the viewers behind the screen. Use the Slido app and ask your questions. And then we can pass on these questions to our panelists. Does any of you wish to start? Yes, I thought so. Sepp Schellhorn, the floor is yours. Well, the question to Raffaela Schaidreiter, the correspondent from Brussels, since she is not working as a journalist in Austria, but she works in Brussels, looking at Austria from Brussels. So how does Austria behave from a Brussels point of view when it's about trade agreements, when it's about these things? Well, how is it perceived? Because what I see is that obviously we are afraid that one of these three yellow press newspapers write against that, and then we have a problem. And, well, Austria's position is considered as being very discrepant and distorted. Mercosur is a trade agreement which has been negotiated between the EU Commission, that is responsible for the 27 EU member states to negotiate, and Mercosur has been negotiated over 20 years with the four South American states, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil, and it would create the largest free trade zone of the world. In other words, reduce hurdles in order to make sure that a company from Austria can supply products to Brazil, or Brazilian entrepreneur could deliver to Italy. And in the agreement it says which the respective other party needs to adhere to, how products should look like, in order to be able to be shipped to the market without any hurdles. Let's imagine if a product from Brazil comes to Austria, then without any hurdles, and can be shipped to Sweden, France, Portugal, because this is the USP of this common market, that you do not have to go to national authorities to have this product certified. The same rules hold true throughout Europe. So you can really ship it through from Brazil to, for instance, Portugal. Negotiations have taken 20 years. I think in 2018, 2019, in March, there was political agreement on Mercosur. It was in 2019. It was under Juncker. It was political agreement. And they said after 20 years we agreed. We have built the large pillars. Now we have to break that down. We have to add figures, but we know what we want. And then there was the time 2019. This was just before European election. There was Friday for Futures. There was the climate movement, which started growing. And there have always been concerns raised. Bolsonaro was in Brazil. And then were concerns, what would it mean if we do trade with the Brazilians? So what do the Brazilians actually do? Bolsonaro has the Amazon rainforest cut, everything is burning, and CO2 is being emitted. And then the agricultural lobby in Europe cried out loudly, particularly farmers who said, well, let's wait a minute. If those can produce cheap soya there, and they have different standards when it comes to production, they can use more herbicides, pesticides, more fertilizers, the spaces, in particularly cheap, labor is cheap, soya bean, any crop, they can produce these products at a price we in Austria can never compete with. And naturally beef, because they breed cattle there, and the beef fillet is transported to Europe. The price is not competitive anymore. And this overall sum total of concerns then ended up on the main stage, and this meant, on top of that, there was COVID-19, and all these concerns voiced meant that a larger and increasing large number of countries, because the Commission actually negotiated Mercosur on behalf of the countries, and then the countries said, well, wait a moment, we do not know whether we actually want Mercosur. We've negotiated for 20 years, but we do not know whether we really want that. And the countries, and this was mainly Austria, Ireland, France, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. So these were countries with strong traditional agriculture. So agriculture really kept the upper hand. And by the way, the economy didn't say much. Representatives of the economy didn't say much, particularly in Austria. They said, Mercosur is beneficial for us. We want a free trade zone. We want to do business with these four South American countries. And now negotiations have been going on for 4 years. Well, they even said that Mercosur had been killed. Well, lots of people focused on Mr. Bolsonaro, and they said, let's wait after Brazilian elections, and now we see an upward trend. Commission has started to work, making sure that it will be possible to not only agree politically about Mercosur, but to reach some general agreement. So there should be some additional text, so that the American countries commit themselves to do more for the protection of rainforests. Now Austria is a minority. There are some concerns raised in Austria and in the Netherlands because the farmers are very strong. There is this farmers' protest party who says that we do not want our products from Brazil to come to the Netherlands, and our farmers will not be able to compete on a price level with these products. And so in the Commission, they do not really know where the trip will go to. I mean, Austria could be overruled, it could go to the European Court, would be an opportunity, but Austria is in the minority right now. Mercosur per se, this free trade, is actually being sought and striven for by the European Commission and considered to be something positive by the rest of the EU member states. We mustn't forget competition with China or India, for instance, and Russia too. These 4 South American countries have resources China also wants to get its hand on. Other emerging major powers also want that natural resources. And the question for us, Europe, is do we want to be the first ones to be there, or do we want to think about lots of other topics like protection of social rights, employees' rights, rainforests? Yeah, I believe that they will shape the markets anyway, the South European markets. I mean, they will strike a deal with China or Russia, then the standards will not be so high, and then you see the benefits of a market. The market is good to define standards. So if we good Europeans believe that we need to save our dairy production, save the climate, and we do not do a Mercosur agreement because they violate the standards, so the South American states will nevertheless conclude an agreement with China or with Russia. But the world has changed, actually. I remember in the US, most traditionally, the Republican Party has always been a party for free trade agreement, very much in favor of free trade agreement. But over the last 10 years, there has been a massive change. And under Trump in Washington, there are hardly any free trade supporters, and particularly with the Republicans and also with the Democrats. You have to seek them with a magnifying glass, actually. I mean, you cannot close your eyes to reality, Mr. Schellhorn. You're absolutely right. You mustn't be naive. These are very complex issues, and you cannot just, well, give everything its blessing, but just, well, pulling the stop button, pushing the stop button is not an answer. So now it's about competition between Europe and other parts of the world. It's about the fact that the fruits of the market, so to speak, need to arrive among people. Then there are people who give preference to their own interests, being lobbyists or special groups. And we hope that people will understand that everybody seeks to find a solution. I mean, we also seek to find a solution. This brings me, however, back from the trade policy debate to Europe, to Austria. And the lady from the Federal Antitrust Authority, there are lots of antitrust issues. What about the situation? Is there anything you can report about the current antitrust situation that could be of interest to our viewers? And please, well, think about possible questions you would like to ask. Think about some smart and interesting questions, because I will ask you then. Okay. Thank you for your question. Just a footnote. Agriculture is very important in the value-added chain for the competition authority. This can also play a role. There were 2 mergers in dairy economy which we tested, and we have a minimum security package, safeguarding package for Austrian farmers. This is also very important to make sure that fair conditions are also being created for our Austrian dairy farmers after this merger in the dairy industry. So we look at each and every element along the value supply chain when it comes to the dairy production, for instance. And since you discussed the image Austria enjoys in Brussels, and I believe it, and I may say so as a very active and committed person, we are considered a committed Austrian competition authority. And when I tell colleagues about the cases we discussed, well, sometimes you look across the border, you exchange with other investigators, competitive investigator, what are the the cases you analyze? And I can tell you, as the competitive guardian, I would be happy if we had no negative cases, because then our work would work excellently. But actually, there were some large antitrust procedures in Austria. For instance, there was the freight forwarding trust, and then the large trust in the construction industry that formed. This was a trust that took from 2002 until 2017, when we started our investigations. And there you see in some areas this step. Now, we have a different market order. It's no longer possible to form these illicit mergers. There is no such trust register. And obviously, they have not really understood. But what is very positive, this week I was invited by the construction industry to discuss on a panel on the future. And the CEO of a large construction group said that these investigations launched by us were like a big bang. And he said, we required that as a construction industry. If you had this large thing for over 20 years, and then one needs to stand up and said, I do not longer want to participate, and you do not dare to stand up because you will be the bad boy out. And now that we started these investigations, the structures are slowly crumbling, and the companies used this as an opportunity to take compliance measures, to make sure that under company law they start dissolving these networks, also when it comes from the concrete mixing installations and so on. You require some concrete starting point. So, for instance, the authority becomes active to trigger a reformation process in the construction sector. And another entrepreneur in the construction industry said this is important because the young people who want to join, they do not want to have all these negative things. Also in terms of their mindset, the young people want to work in a very compliant company. Compliance is very important for them to identify with the company. Also when it comes to hiring, the reputation companies enjoy is very, very important, particularly among young people. And I believe these two layers are so important for a competitive authority. They say we have our procedures against those who breach the rules, and we inform them. So we always focus on compliance. This is very important, and I think we enjoy a good situation. But maybe the Commission holds a different point of view. But this is very important, this aspect that we still have some of these very large antitrust cases, these large, conglomerates. And this is a sign that we haven't had well-working antitrust law in Austria for such a long time, that the antitrust authority is a very young one. And there's a lot of work ahead of us, actually, in Austria. But do you require whistleblowers in order to start investigation, or when do you start investigations by yourselves? Well, this differs. Most interestingly, maybe you are so young you can no longer remember this one, is one of the questions I ask in the interviews. Let's assume you are there in a company, you have this great desk, you can move up and down, and where do you find the first trust? And then often they say, well, no idea. How does it trust? How do our work work? Well, whistleblowing, sometimes it is information shared with us by companies. Companies, by the way, also use our anonymous opportunity to report abuse. So we are in a different positioned at the criminal area where individuals report cases. And there, here on the report, we often notice that under the whistleblowing system, it is SMEs. Then you can register as witness of the Crown. And since 2006, when it was introduced, we've had more than 120 companies that stood as witnesses to the Crown. So it's always very difficult for companies to say, I no longer cooperate in this trust structure. I report to the authority, I'll stand up and cooperate with the authority. Companies often told me that this has some social characters. Some 12, 13 years, an entrepreneur said, well, the CEOs from the competitors, they no longer play golf with me because of that, because I reported the case to the authority and I said, I'm so sorry, I'm grateful for you for having reported that, but this is the negative impact that your competitors no longer play golf with you. But there is this program that you can stand as witness to the Crown. And this might be a whistleblowing system, but the way I experience it, from the point of view of the CEOs who manage such companies, it is an opportunity. If I find out that there's something illegal, this is an opportunity to move out of this illegal situation into a good, well-governed situation. And the company as such benefits from good governance. Well, these are different approaches, and other authorities also notice things and they report these cases to us, and every now and then, and we could use this as some anecdotal evidence. We have this very important case of the so-called kebab cartel that led to some funny coverage in the newspaper. Newspaper said that owners of kebab stores said that they agreed on increasing prices in general. I mean, media can also be a source for our investigations. A question, the beer prices. Since energy prices have increased, prices for beer, and there are two large suppliers for the gastronomy and hostelry sector, they increased by 18 to 20%, but for the trade sector, their prices remained low. Are you talking about beer? You were talking. I'm talking about the beerflation, and I need to report that the beer brewers said the prices in the beer retail trade are low because they have such a huge power. Well, you can contact me anonymously. You can call us. You can write an email. You can do some whistleblowing. We're always there for you, 24/7. And there's a very rare case that in a live discussion a trust-like situation was uncovered, and now an anonymized information has been shared with us by anonymous whistleblowers. There are just lots of people who watch our debate on YouTube, but very interesting, this new beer cartel. So who wants to ask a question? One question here, and there's another question, and well, we'll start back there. Yeah, okay. Just briefly be so kind and introduce yourself, and then please speak up loudly. And I can't hear you. The young man doesn't use the microphone, otherwise our interpreter cannot hear him. Okay. My name is Adrian Möri, and what I'm interested in is the topic of artificial intelligence and what impact artificial intelligence has on answering the questions raised. A question to Director-General, the lady. So, can any antitrust things can be discovered by algorithms, for instance? And the next question, and unfortunately I cannot hear the moderator, says the interpreter, I can only read his lips, and I assume that he wants to ask the people to ask their questions. Okay, good. My name is Felix Wimmer, and my specific question is, please speak up, dear Felix Wimmer. And we have always heard the sentence, the market will regulate matters. This is a highly controversial thing, in my view, and I'm interested in your view. Is this true, or is this just some economic liberal, saying? Okay, next question. No, don't tell him what he is supposed to ask, says the moderator.
Hallo,
Okay, hello.
mein Name ist Fabian
My
Plank
name
und
is
mich würde
Fabian
interessieren, wie
Plank,
sehen
and
Sie
I'd
die
be
Spannungsverhältnis
interested
zwischen dem
in this
freien Markt,
relation of
dem absoluten
tension
freien Markt
between an
und dem
absolutely
freien und fairen
free
Wettbewerb,
market
die
and
sich
free
ja
and
eigentlich
fair
diametral
competition.
gegenüberstehen.
Because in my view, that those two are diametrically opposed. Okay, I would suggest that we start with a more general question and then go to artificial intelligence. So the neoliberal chit-chat. Mr. Schellhorn, do you believe that's true? Sepp Schellhorn said that's true. There's some neoliberal talk. Mrs. Frostorff, well, there is something like failure, something as failure in the markets there are markets that tip, that collapse, and we saw that in the digital area, where it was necessary at European level to develop the digital market act that in core it goes beyond that. It's a regulation instrument because it says that I do not come to terms anymore with this power in the market because the markets have tipped. I have just one huge trust, one huge cartel. I have this ecosystem. You cannot say markets work automatically, but markets, and this has been mentioned, require certain market conditions. And on a case-by-case basis, I have to intervene in order to make sure that markets work again. From the national economic point of view, this is not contested. We have 140 jurisdictions worldwide. They have a competitive law, always based on a different point of view of what a functioning market actually is. And I'm sure if we compare the goals, for instance, for employers among a Chinese competition authority, by the way, this is a huge competition authority, a South American, the Austrian and the American and the Argentinian competition authority, there will be major differences. But one thing is clear, markets every now and then require some rectification, to make sure that they go straight. And we have to make sure that markets stay free. If I have a cartel which seeks to keep other competitors out of the market, then nobody will be able to enter the market, and then competition will no longer work. And this is just a general statement. Well, the correspondent, market failure. There has always been this topic last winter with the energy and the composition of energy costs and the model of merit order, how our electricity price is being defined, how that electricity price is based on the most expensive source of energy required to produce electricity, and this was gas. And lots of people said the market doesn't work in its current form because this led to massive price increases. The Commission has submitted a proposal saying that this pricing system, this price formation model, electricity market needs to be changed maybe. But this was what we call like cosmetic interference. This was a one-off event, so to speak, a one-off, in inverted commas, a disaster, that because of this lack of gas supply from Russia, we did not have enough gas, which had an impact on the gas prices. But what we see is that they think more often about maybe intervening, interfering with the market, particularly when it comes to requirements defined by the market, that, for instance, 40% of renewable technology, be it solar panels, for instance, are to be produced within the European Union in the future. These are some requirements, state requirements we would not have seen a few years ago in this current form. Maybe this is actually a change of paradigms, but this is also well connected with the current situation, with the environment we are currently living in. Whether they will lead to the results we want to see is another issue. But there are certain developments within the Commission, and we see that they slightly move away from giving some leeway, any leeway to the market. Now state regulation seems to be a bit more important. No, I do not agree, because the positive impact could not be perceived by the consumers, as Mr. Schellhorn. Yeah, but looking at the energy mix, for instance, of France, they just have 5% inflation, and our inflation is almost twice as high, because they have a completely different mix of energy. They have nuclear electricity. We made ourselves too much dependent on one market, and this market position, I mean, this is no free market. Gas, you cannot go to a petrol station and just buy some gas to be able to stock it. But there it works differently than in a hotel, for instance. But this is a clear example. If a market is not open and not subject to competition as our market in the hotel and in Austria, we depend too much on one supplier. Nuclear electricity is something we bedeviled, and we always advertise that in the province of Salzburg, 100% of electricity is produced from renewable energy, and nevertheless prices increases, and nobody understands. And this means that people are fed up with politics. Nobody understands. They say merit order, and for this reason we have to have such high electricity prices. 6 cents per kilowatt hour is what I paid until the end of the year. And now I pay 26 cents, although energy prices have decreased. And now I should only pay 12 or 13 cents, but I pay the high prices. I'm in favor of free markets. I'm in favor of competition. And this will only this will guarantee democracy. Where there is no free market, no competition, there will never be democracy. Because you mentioned merit order and the pricing composition of prices. At the very beginning of the discussion, I tried to highlight this very complex nature, and it takes so long to explain that. Let me give you an example. There's Hinterwildalpen, a small municipality. They produce everything themselves. They have a small hydropower plant, they have solar panels, PV, they have a small biomass plant there, and they have the same electricity prices. And people said, we do not understand that. We produce everything ourselves, and why do we have to pay these high prices? People do not understand, and this leads to lack of trust, not only when it comes to politics, but also when it comes to markets and competition. Yes, and there is one political party and says, blame it all on Brussels. But there's no party that says Brussels is not responsible. But you know, Brussels is responsible for everything. Has always been the case and will always be the case. Brussels is to be blamed for everything. The ambassador says, when we talk about market failure, how does the market work? And the answer is simple. Markets do not come, as you said, from heaven sent. We have to shape the market. But not everything needs to be regulated by the market. There are other models where you involve governments more strongly. Let me tell you a brief joke. Admittedly, a Ukrainian told me this joke. Imagine, a Russian goes to a car dealer. He wants to buy a car. And the car dealer says, yes. Do you have the money? The Ukrainian says, yes, I have the money. They check it. And this market dealer says, yes, you can buy a vehicle. In 10 years' time, you will get your vehicle. In 10 years, the Ukrainian says, in the morning or in the afternoon. But you said, in 10 years' time, you will get the vehicle. There's no difference whether in the morning or in the evening. That's important, because in the morning, in 10 years' time, I have an appointment with my plumber. So just imagine, this is a brief joke. Yeah, the question about artificial intelligence, it's a question to Mrs. Harsdorf from the Competition Authority, and then we have one round of questions. So Mrs. Harsdorf will answer the question about artificial intelligence. So AI. Well, I believe every authority and every member state focuses on that. On the one hand, very correct, yes. What happened if the algorithm decided what makes sense from the economic point of view to form a trust or to form a monopoly, and there is no individual, no person behind. Then the question is liability. Will companies be able to be made liable for what their algorithm does? On the other hand, there's the question, do we have to be better prepared? We as authorities, do we have to use AI? And I see in the audience the RTR manager. In cooperation with the RTR, we work on these questions involving AI. What we do is that we test certain things, huge amounts of data we have in the authority, whether we can filter them in a meaningful manner using AI. But this requires a lot of sense of responsibility. For competition, it is important that innovation is possible. At the same time, however, everybody is aware of the risks involved. Everybody is aware that we are not yet able to assess the limits of this new technology, and this actually tops the agenda of the meetings of enforcement agencies. So AI tops the agenda, data scientists are being hired. So a large question mark. Actually, this is a large question mark. Thanks a lot. I also have a question from the online viewers. I will ask one of these questions, but there's you raised your hand. You want to ask your question, or the person behind? One question here, one question there, and another one. So 3 questions, 1 Slido question, and then a final round. So, yeah, Mike is approaching. Alexandra Latzenhofner. With lots of interest, I listened to this discussion. We are affected. We close the curtain and the questions are open because you haven't answered the question whether markets are here for people or people are here for the markets, or vice versa. Maybe this has to do with what Mr. Felbermayr said. The markets have been made by people, and this is a statement, not so much of a question. It depends on the point of view the individual holds, whether the results are assessed as good or bad. And just to give you 3 brief examples, the lady from the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation's office in Brussels is an example of an interference in the market because, however, we are quite happy about this interference because we all want a good Austrian Broadcasting Corporation. Sepp Schellhorn is a pioneer fighting for the free market, but he maybe wants this state subsidies in the cultural area because he, as an owner of a hotel, benefits from that. And the lady from the Competition Authority, for 1.5 years, if I'm right, she has been the victim of a, call me, typical intervention in Austria in the free labor market. And from her perspective, and also from my point of view, and lots of citizens agree that this intervention is an intervention which is not desirable. Okay, yes, we will discuss that later on. And the lady who raised her hand, the microphone is on your left-hand side, milady. Yes, my question. Waltraud Dürer from Salzburg Aluminum. I have a question. Please explain ISPIT to us, because we have seen that it's a great idea, but in practice it has killed SMEs. Please, I can explain that to you. Excuse me, I couldn't hear that, says Mr. Winterstein. ISPI, international at the EU level, this competition institution at EU level that promotes and funds things that on the one hand actually have a negative impact on SMEs. We can have no access on this, and then large countries like France, for instance, use this technology we have developed at our cost, and France uses 260 million to subsidize a large competitor of ours, and we ask ourselves whether this is good. And then there is a question. So this is about aluminum. And then a question.
My
name is Georg Nollberger, and I ask myself, I'm definitely no expert, but watching the news on the Austrian TV, I always see that people find it difficult to make ends meet, and this does not only hold true for people who do not earn a good income, but this also holds true for middle class, even the quite well-off middle class. So is this a failure of the market that people can no longer make ends meet? And there's always speculation. What can the competition authority do? Maybe there's an agreement on pricing, particularly in the foodstuff sector. And what can governments do so that people can actually afford a living, afford survival? Okay, let's take these questions, and the question by the lady from the aluminum sector, I will personally answer this question. This relates more to Brussels. I will explain that to you, dear lady, in a bilateral discussion. And there's a Slido question, how markets and competitions, and in how far markets and competition will change in the future. So I would suggest that we collect these questions, and you, one after the other, or maybe in a sequence, would like to answer these questions. Maybe we start with Martin Weiss, and particularly also this final question, whether and in how far markets and competition will change in the future. Yes, from my point of view, it is absolutely clear that the markets have to be there for the people. The Federal Competition Authority has to work for the people. Our governments have to deliver for the people. And this is precisely what you say. If all of a sudden people have the feeling that things don't work, that the promise we've all grown up with, the promise was that this system works for you. You can create some wealth, you have some good education at the academic high school. I attended the 300 meters. You work, you make earn some money, you can afford a house. And if this promise no longer works, then we're faced with a major problem. And a few words about local Salzburg politics. Why have communists won more than 20% in the city of Salzburg? This has to do with the fact that people say affordable housing. Well, I cannot afford housing, and this is the yardstick for our democratic societies. Does this thing work for our citizens? And if these things no longer work for our citizens, then people tend to look around and they say, well, there are different approaches. Strong men, mainly men, who can regulate everything. And this is precisely the direction we do not want to embark on. And I believe what is going on in the EU is so important. They create transparency, a level playing field, ensure fair competition, that things can be compared. And this is so important, particularly when it comes to transparency. I feel in Austria that we definitely need to catch up. We are lagging far behind. Imagine that journalists have to go to court often in order to write an article, and markets have to work for the people, and if markets no longer work for the people, then we've made a mistake. Let's continue with Schoenberg, Mrs. the lady from the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation. Well, lots of people have the impression that markets not work, and even if I act in a transparent manner, if I start investigations, and then under the bottom line, if the outcome doesn't help people in their everyday life, then this leads to a lack of trust, that people are fed up with politics. And I'm sure that in June 2024, with the forthcoming EU elections, we will feel this sentiment, because people in the regions, they tell me at European level, well, hardly anything happens. Yes, there's often the saying things have to be implemented at national level, but it's about markets that are developed in the same manner in all 27 member states. And well, Brussels, on behalf of the EU Commission, they co-shape the market. They contribute to this market shaping. So, and that they always, do not say that they make Brussels a scapegoat, but they blame Brussels. And we see it. We see this sentiment evolving. And particularly with all these green plans, with all this Green Deal legislation, the more concrete and the more clearly these evolve, the more clear it becomes who is affected by green legislation, who has to pay for that. We see massive resistance, not when the renaturation and then vehicles that have to go mainly electrically powered from 2035 on. And it needs not only to be explained by Brussels, but also by the national governments. And national governments need to embrace them, need to support us, say, yes, it will cost something. How do we distribute the costs? And somebody will have to pay for that. Others might say, well, these are luxury problems. Others are worse off in the world. We have to be pioneers. We have to make sure that we have clean cars, well-isolated housing and apartments. And who has to pay for that? We will think about it later on. This is the wrong approach. It has to be a participatory approach. Lots of things have to be explained to people more clearly. And this is what we said at the beginning. It has to be explained to people what is the market. This is all of us, the 500 million consumers. Who creates the markets? This is us. And this brings me to AI too. How is AI to be regulated in the EU? How is it to look like? What it is allowed to do? What does it have to do? Not allowed to do? And there is always people behind. And if you lose sight of all that, then things become, difficult. And then this leads to, shifting guilt and responsibility to all sorts of others. Yeah, but resistance is fine. Whenever there is discussion and transparency, this is good. But you need to adopt a holistic approach. Just talking about Austria, this process has really helped us a lot since 1995. And this is very clear. This can always be evidenced. So this was a major benefit for each and every one of us, although you might criticize these or other procedures. Yeah. But to come back to this young gentleman, as Mr. Schellhorn, I am an employer. I have 100 employees. And the core problem is employees cost too much and earn too little. The cost factor work, there's too much taxes on work and labor in Austria. And this brings me to competition. You might say you can control things, and then others might say taxes. You can talk about inheritance and prosperity taxes, and you can also talk about competition among federal provinces. This will be federalism. And the former Minister of Finance says we live in a country where everybody is responsible, but cannot be held responsible for things. And if you look how we could fill federalism with life, as is the case in Switzerland, that tax on work would be reduced by 25%. This would mean that 10 billions would be necessary. Provinces, Salzburg, for instance, can match with other, can compete with other federal provinces about attracting companies, offering favorable conditions on the business location, because imagine an employee actually earns 1,800 gross and just gets 1,200 net. But a transparency database would be necessary. Minister of Finance promised that at the time. The Corinthians said we cannot solve that technically, while the Chinese land on the backside of the moon. We cannot solve the issue of a transparency database, technologically speaking. Well, there's another reason. The Carinthia is the poorest province, and for this reason they do not feed data into this transparency register. I'm actually in favor of competition competition among the provinces and the municipality. There's financial equalization discussion. They sing about money is coming home, as is with football. They say football is coming home. They say we do not have to undertake an effort. We get money back because of this equalization discussion. To come back to the culture. Culture is no source of income. It is something intellectual. And as a free market economist, I'm in favor of defining fixed prices for books. Otherwise, we would always only have Dan Browns, only the bestsellers, but no other books in Austria. And the great young poet would never have the opportunity to publish a single book because he would never be able to find a publishing house, except they set up their own publishing house. Culture cannot be calculated based on market economic principles. Culture is a very important asset also from the point of tourism policy for Salzburg, and the whole of Austria lives on culture, actually, not of the beautiful seas and lakes. We have lovely lakes and mountains. We have that all across the world, but we have culture in Austria. I do not agree with your opinion. Okay, well, we can discuss that later on, lovely. Yes? And I would like to commend somebody. No. I believe that we have the most beautiful lakes in the world, in Austria. Okay, competition, markets, the lady from the competition authority, this has been mentioned, lots of questions that have been raised. So the lady from the competition authority, what are your concluding remarks? It's great that you have the final say. Well, the European Commission planned such a series of events, markets are for people or vice versa. So when I heard about that, I really liked that a lot, because if you had such an important institution and assume this responsibility, you also have to think about your understanding of your official function and what do I share with my team. And so it's so very important with all these calculations about markets we perform, about all the facts we collect. We must always be aware of one thing, my team and I, people are there and companies are behind all that. And also when it's about special procedures, what is it all about at the end? The outcome should be good for Austria, for the people, for the consumer, for the companies. The outcome should always be positive and favorable for all of us. And this is why I really like this question about the markets to the people. And what you addressed is also reflected in lots of questions we are asked. And this is why it's so important to engage in a dialogue and say that there are opportunities, for instance, when it comes to electricity prices, to be in contact with e-control, how to change tariffs, for instance. We try to make sure that we get people in touch with the authorities that can help them. My task as a representative of the competitive authority is defined in the law. My task is to make sure that we use each and every tool of this tool set to be particularly active when it comes to a special situation. And you know, there are lots of other tools and instruments a government has, a parliament has, and monetary policy, fiscal policy, social policy. The competition authority is responsible for a special sector when it comes to implementing and enforcing things, but we as an authority can make a contribution to make sure that life is affordable, and this is the underlying idea of competition law. And if you look at that, and I had a look at documents from the US, and you see that discussions that took place in the 1890s, these were precisely such discussions. They had huge monopolies in the 1890s in the US. They wanted to move away from the monopolies, wanted to have diversified economies with lots of players in the market that compete for the favor of the consumer, but the consumer has a choice. So the consumer can choose whether they want to buy product A or B. They can compare the prices. They have this choice. They can select, and this is very important. And naturally, you see the effect of the investigations we start. We see often the belated effect, but all of a sudden we see the immediate effect. We can not necessarily prove that there is a causal connection, but in autumn, for instance, we saw in the field of pellets for heating, but this related to just a few companies, but it sent out a signal to the market. It had an impact on the market. We get the immediate feedback from the market, and after we discovered this pellets issue, and then consumers wrote, hey, you launched the investigations, now pellets are available in the market. So there is a signal effect, and the people realize there's a competition authority. It focuses on these processes, and this has a direct impact on the markets. And I think time has come for the final words. Well, thank you very much. I can only speak for myself. I hope this also holds true for all of you. I have been highly impressed by this discussion because I always had the feeling that the large abstract concepts have always been explained by many and each and every one of you. And I would like to thank all panelists. You have always given some very concrete example to explain that I'm not an economist, I'm an ethologist, and I was able to follow this discussion, although I'm no economist. So I believe that many in the audience are no studied economists, and they were able to understand. This has provided a lot of food for thought, and is always the case with such discussion. It becomes most interesting and exciting at the end of every debate. Just a piece of information, it's not over yet. If you go down to the ground floor, some refreshments will be served, and you can continue discussing there. Thank you very much to the participants, each and every one. Thanks a lot. And last but not least, I would also like to thank the European Commission and the Salzburg Global Seminar, our hosts of today. For the organizers, I would like to thank the organizers for this highly relevant round of panel discussions. Yes, there are refreshments downstairs. Keep on discussing. Thank you.